Should a political background be a red flag or a secret weapon for a city manager? I recently joined Joe Turner on the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, and we tackled that question head on. Joe and I both came into this profession through politics, and we unpack how that experience can boost your effectiveness, the pitfalls to avoid, and how to make the transition stick. We also talk about something every city manager faces: online advocacy. How do you separate legitimate public input from noise generated by a handful of keyboard warriors? And how do you keep your team focused in the middle of all of it? The City Manager Unfiltered podcast is audio only, so if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see a static image following this introduction. Stay to the very end, because I'll share my best advice on personal branding as a city manager and why it's not about ego, it's about resilience and career longevity. Before we dive in, do me a quick favor: hit subscribe and share this episode. It helps us reach more local government pros who need these tools. Now let's jump into my candid conversation with Joe Turner on the City Manager Unfiltered podcast.
All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered Podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And today I have someone who I've been in the trenches with. I've known for quite some time, over 15 years or so. We both worked in partisan politics together in different capacities. His name is Chris Mann. He's the former city manager for the city of Yucaipa, California. He's now the city manager in Wildomar, California. So, Chris, why don't you give a quick little introduction to the folks?
Yeah, Joe, thank you. Really good to be here with you. I've been a big fan of the show since the very beginning. You and I have known each other for so long. I was telling my wife today, I'm excited to be going on City Manager Unfiltered. I'm kind of surprised that it's taken us this long to do it, but I'm just really, really happy to be here. So I'm, as you mentioned, I'm currently managing the city of Wildomar, which is in Riverside County, California, just under 40,000 population, probably about 38,000 currently population. And before that, I was in the city of Yucaipa, which is actually where I live. That's in San Bernardino County, California, population about 55,000. And then prior to that, I managed the city of Canyon Lake for 4 years, which is a city of just over 11,000 people in Riverside County, mostly gated community, really fascinating community there. And that was my first opportunity to step into that city manager chair, which was the realization of a long-held career goal of mine. I just fell in love with the profession, even though I've had a very varied professional background. At this point, I cannot imagine doing anything else. And kind of that varied background is something that you and I have in common.
Yeah.
We both came 100%. We both came from what I would call unconventional routes to the city management profession, and in both of our cases, that included a heavy dose of politics. Right?
Yeah, partisan politics, and it's going to be interesting to kind of unpack that a little bit because it is a very non-traditional route. Even though you and I have known each other for 15 years or so, I had no clue that you wanted to be a city manager until I learned that you took the city manager job. We'd kind of lost track. I'd moved out of the area of San Bernardino County and what have you. And I think we can kind of unpack that journey for you. I've shared on this podcast in different formats and in conversations of why I was attracted to the idea of becoming a city manager. And I'll just give you, a quick little synopsis of that for the audience. But I want to hear more about why you want to become a city manager and why you decided to make that change. Because you were very established in your private sector career before you made that transition. I was not as established. I had a little bit of a different story, and so I made a pivot. But for me, I've always been an ideologue of sorts. I've always been very passionate in my viewpoints, my worldview on government and how it should operate and what have you. And so I was cursed with this notion that one person can make a difference, and that's how I became this sort of activist and got engaged in partisan politics and what have you.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned in the new book I wrote, the City Manager's Guide to Contract Negotiations, I would wake up and I get punched in the face every day living in California and having a conservative worldview, and it was a tough slog. And so for me, it was the realization that I think the best way that I can be the change I want to see in the world is going into the administrative side of local government as an executive and trying to reform government or make government more efficient and the eyes, at least the scope and the way I want to do it. That was what my motivation was, right? And I'm kind of curious, what was your motivation? Because you were much more successful and established in your career when you made the transition to city management than I was. I was established in a activist sense, but not necessarily in a professional sense.
Yeah, well, and similarly, Joe, I think for a lot of us that get into this work, it is about, what kind of an impact can we have on the world, and more specifically, in our local communities, and having a passion for that. And I think, for me, that's it too. But my path was a little bit different there, and how I came to decide that city management was the thing was very different. And I got there through politics and through business. And I think for a lot of my career, I was struggling with kind of competing interests and ideas, competing motivations, right? I mean, I wanted to make an impact in the world. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be in a position where I could further what I felt was the best thing, right? But I also wanted to make a living. Right? Yeah. And, my political background is,
I live in California, Chris.
It's expensive.
It's expensive to live in California. So.
Yeah. And for someone of your political persuasion, Joe, there are fewer and fewer opportunities career-wise, right?
Endangered species in the political world. Yeah.
That's right.
My goodness.
So let me get real here for a second, because I don't often talk about the partisan political side of my past, and for good reason, because when I made that transition and became a city manager, it was a difficult thing for me to shake the political stigma, right? Well,
of course.
Chris is a political guy. He's not a policy guy. He's not a administrative guy. He's a political guy. And yes, I mean, I did have that political background, and I think it's helpful to come into the profession with a high degree of political acumen. I think that's something I bring that is unique. But also understanding that in the role you don't act politically. There's a big differentiation there. But let me go back. Let me go back to the beginning. When I was very young, I got involved in government and politics. And it was a local issue. It was my senior year of college. I was going to California Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks, California. And I was living in the city of Westlake Village. And there was an issue that was making the local paper, and it was a land use issue. And I caught my interest, and I had a strong opinion on that issue. And so I thought, well, maybe we'll go to a city council meeting and see what this is all about. And I went, and there was a group there, an organized group that was opposed to a project. And I thought, I'm going to stand up and say something. So I got up to the podium. I said a few words. A few meetings later, the topic was on the agenda again. Got up, I said a few words. And afterwards, there was a lady who ran that group who came up to me, and she said, "There's an election coming up. You should think about running." And I said,
"You have been incredulous. I mean, you're like, what, are you 19 years old?"
I said, "No, I was my senior. I was 23 years old." I said, "You realize I'm 23, right?" And so I graduate college, and I think it was, May or June of that year. It was 1999. And I decide, what the heck, I'm going to give this political thing a whirl. I'm going to run. So that November, at that time, the city of Westlake Village, like a number of cities at that time, had odd year, off year elections. So the election was in 1999. And I was not supposed to win that race. I was running almost as an academic exercise, and to bring light to a topic that I was passionate about. And I walked every door. I wasn't smart enough back then to understand you're supposed to, have lists of people who actually vote, and, high propensity voters. I walked every door.
I told you guys we're partisan political animals. We used to be partisan political animals.
That's right. Yeah. But that was at the advent of robocalling. And I was one of the first. I was the first in the city to ever use it. And I walked precincts, raised just enough money, send a little bit of mail. And I was running against a guy who was a huge figure in the community. He had been on the original incorporation committee And, no one thought that I had a chance of winning, including myself. And he just took it for granted. And on election night, I won by 23 votes. And,
Wow.
And actually, let me correct that. On election night, I was down by 1 vote. And then as the late absentee ballots came in, it started creeping up, and I ended up winning by 23 votes. But it was a tremendous experience serving on that city council. It hooked me.
That decision, hey, Chris, that decision permanently altered your life path.
It really did. It really did. And the city manager at that time was a guy named Ray Taylor. And Ray ended up being there, I think, for, 25, 26 years or something, which is unusual in the profession, especially today. But Ray was and remains just kind of, for me, the model of what a city manager should be. He just even-keeled, incredibly intelligent. Nothing seemed to shake him. He had a unique ability to steer the ship, but make every member of the city council think they were the ones actually steering the ship, right? It was, and every council member loved him, and the community loved him. And to this day, I often think back and think, well, what would Ray do in this situation, right? So it had.
Do you think that Ray kind of planted the seed after you had that council experience and you're working with him on a day-to-day basis or weekly basis? Did that sort of plant the seed, maybe even that was an option for you as a city manager someday?
I think it did. It planted the seed. It was back there somewhere in my mind, but it wasn't, a formed thought yet.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
At that time, when I was young, I was more, maybe more of an ideologue than I am today. Right. And I at that time, I thought, well, I can do this political thing. I'm going to run for state assembly someday. I'm going to run for Congress someday. And for years, the early years of my career, I had that thought in my mind, and thought I was moving in that direction. And then as I saw the political landscape in California change, and as I got involved in partisan politics, I ended up serving just 1 term on the city council because I had to figure out what to do with my life. And I took a job with a public affairs, public relations firm in Riverside, downtown Riverside, O'Reilly Public Relations, which was and probably still is the largest PR firm in the Inland Empire, which is what we call Riverside and San Bernardino counties here in California. And that was a great experience too, because then I learned land use, I learned entitlement, I learned. I didn't know what an APN was before I worked there, right? I learned a tremendous amount, and this was before the Great Recession. So, everyone doing business in the Inland Empire was on the client roster. So it just exposed me to all kinds of different issues and, building of relationships, and it was huge. And from that launching point, I ended up starting my own company, which I ran for over 13 years, doing public relations and public affairs work. And it was during that time that I started a political action committee called the Inland Empire Taxpayers Association, which grew to be the largest non-union affiliated PAC in the Inland Empire. We'd raise $300,000-$400,000 each cycle. Typically, one cycle I think we did 1.2 million was probably our biggest year. And so I was building these relationships with elected officials, people who ended up being elected officials on city councils and county boards of supervisors throughout the region, which was helpful. And I was very involved with party politics. I was treasurer of the local party. I was went to every convention. I was vice president of the Young Republicans. I was just very active on the political side. And I thought, man, I'm going to be a congressman someday. Right. But as that political landscape changed and I started realizing, and then, the more you're involved with partisan politics, the more you're involved with organized parties, the more you realize that the other people involved are they don't tend to be in the middle. They tend to be on the far end of the spectrum, right? And what you end up with is just a lot of infighting over issues that end up really not mattering, right? You're not really, you realize, I've been spending an awful lot of time going to all these meetings and engaging here, and what are we really accomplishing? What are we, are we really moving the needle?
Rearranging the deck chairs in California when it comes to the Republican Party.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Chris. I got really disillusioned.
I looked at my life and I said, I'm not.
What am I investing my time and energy in here?
Yeah. And is this, am I making an impact, a true impact? No. Am I making real money doing this? Is there the potential to make real? No, not really. And so, I focused a lot on business, and I did well on business. I focused on land use entitlement primarily, but we did work for nonprofits. We did work on campaigns. We did kind of a wide array. Probably 90% of what we did was real estate related, land use entitlement.
Yeah. And for the audience who's listened, and for the audience, the Inland Empire, Riverside, San Bernardino County, basically its bread and butter is the trades, the construction, home development, home building industry. That's why we got hammered after the 2008 recession, or Great Recession. But there's lots of homes being built in the Inland Empire because everyone's fleeing inland where the land's cheaper and the homes are a little bit cheaper because everything's so expensive on the coast. So plenty of work to be done when you're working in that environment.
Well, and the regulations in California are such that it is not easy to build things, which is good for consultants, right?
That's going to be interesting to watch that whole thing shake out with the Palisades fire, right? And all that stuff.
Yeah,
so,
that's true.
Yeah. So you and I, we had shared some experiences. I was on the Republican Party executive board, not the same time as you, but I did my tour of duty on the
different county, board. But yes, yeah.
I thought you were in San Bernardino County, no?
Riverside County. At the time, I was living in the city of Banning.
City living in.
Yeah, city.
Oh, you were in Banning. Okay.
Yeah. And I kept involved, even though I was focusing on my business and my career. I stayed involved. I was over the years I served on two separate water boards. I had loved my time on the city council. Served the last year as mayor at the age of 26, and then served a couple different water boards, and just kind of stayed in touch with local government that way, but really focused on business. But, having gone through the recession and, and then just feeling this, to be honest, a lack of meaning in my life, maybe 8-9 years into running my company, business was good. The book of business was good.
But to what end, right?
I'm sorry, what's that?
But to what end, right?
Yeah, to what end? I felt like I existed to make other people money, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm a big believer in capitalism, but I felt a yearning for greater meaning. And when I had the opportunity to kind of shift career trajectories and go work for a member of the San Bernardino County Board of Supervisors, I took a significant pay cut to do that. But I was looking for a change. I was looking for an opportunity to change the course of my career. And at that time, I still hadn't clearly defined what that meant. But I had the opportunity to go to work as an analyst. And then 8 months in, I was, promoted to deputy chief of staff. And man, I just remembered how much I loved local government. And, working with the cities in the district and the city managers in that district, it was during that time that I realized I'm supposed to be a city manager.
Yeah.
And that job would kind of bring together all the varied things I've done in my background, right? The political side, because it helps to be politically savvy, the policy side, the land use side, managing people, like I did in my business, managing, multi-million-dollar projects, like I did, when I was doing development deals. And it was, invigorating for me to have that as a goal. But, as great as it was to have that clarity, finally, it was a challenge to figure out how to get there.
Well, you and I could talk about a whole episode on this. I mean, I've never really shared this, Chris, but one of the reasons why I left California for Kansas is that I was effectively canceled, before it was called cancel culture, because of my political views. And, there's limited opportunities in California. And like I said earlier in this conversation, you were much more established in your career when you transitioned over to the city management side. Mm-hmm. I was much less established in my career when I tried to transition over to just the general local government side from the political world. When you're trying to move over from the political world into the admin side and you're applying for jobs, and I was applying for management analyst jobs throughout the state, you just looked at with extreme skepticism, and regardless of your political viewpoint, because you're a political person, right? There's a fear that you're going to bring political dynamics into the organization on the admin side if you get hired.
Right.
And then you throw in the other fact of my Google footprint with my political activism and my beliefs, which were out of step with a lot of local government folks in California. Your door gets shut in your face quite a bit. So for me, I had to transition and do a relocation out of state. You had obviously the ability to jump straight into the city management level in California at the time that you transitioned when I did not, but that's not easy either. And so you had a pretty interesting and somewhat fortuitous situation happen for you, and that's how you landed your gig, right? Do you feel like unpacking that for the audience?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. So I had worked for the Board of Supervisors. I was continuing to do my consulting work, although scaled back, because I knew I was looking for an exit from that. And, I had identified that I wanted to be a city manager. And so I figured I needed to get in the pipeline somewhere. In fact, a gentleman who I have a lot of admiration for, who has become somewhat of a mentor for me, this guy named Greg Devereaux, who used to be the CEO for the county of San Bernardino. And before that, he'd been a city manager, worked for the cities of Ontario and Fontana during times, when those cities were just exploding with growth. And he's just kind of like the godfather, I think, of city managers in the region. And he was the county CEO at the time when I worked for the county. So that was my connection, how I got to know him.
And when I was there too.
Yes, that's right.
Too.
Yeah. And so I asked if he would meet with me, and he did. He's always been very generous with his time. It's usually coffee in the morning. And so we sat down and had coffee. And he gave me some good advice. He said, listen, you can do it. He said, you just have to get in the pipeline somewhere, right? You may or may not be able to jump right into the city manager role, but just get in somewhere. It doesn't matter if you're a PIO, doesn't matter if you're in public works. Find a place where you can get in, and then, you'll do a great job and you'll move up. And I really took that to heart. So I started applying everywhere for everything. I was applying for city manager jobs, which I didn't think I had a chance of getting. I was applying for assistant city manager jobs in mostly small to mid-sized cities where I thought they might be looking for more of a generalist in those spots. I was applying for PIO positions, economic development positions, because I figured with my real estate background, economic development,
and land development, all that,
would make sense. And I probably dozens of applications I submitted. And then something unusual happened in 2018. A gentleman who was serving on the Board of Supervisors in San Bernardino County moved to the state assembly, which created a vacancy. And in San Bernardino County, there's a county charter that dictates when there is a vacancy that the Board of Supervisors can vote to fill that vacancy. And so they were starting to go through that process, and I got a phone call saying, hey, essentially, to the county supervisors are interested in appointing you for that position.
You were getting a push.
I was getting a push. Yeah. So I thought, well, this could be interesting.
But push farther away from that city manager journey. But if you're trying to apply for city manager jobs and all the other gigs and the door being slammed in your face, you kind of feel like I guess I'm just locked into this path, right? In a sense.
Yeah, I mean, it would have brought me a little bit back more onto the political path that I had gotten away from. But I guess I had two thoughts on that. One, if you're going to do a political job, then county supervisor is where it's at, right? It's not, it's in California, it's not partisan. You're not elected by party. It's a considered nonpartisan seat. And it's tangible. It's local government, really, on a grander scale than a city. It's one of the best jobs, in terms of elected jobs in politics.
A lot of power, and I don't mean that in a Machiavellian sense, but you get to impact a lot of people's lives. And you're talking about these counties that are growing rapidly, because we talked about the growth and the migration of the population inland. So those are pretty nice gigs.
Yeah, and at that time, San Bernardino County is one of the huge counties, right? I mean, it had like over 22,000 employees. I think the budget at that time was somewhere around $5 billion a year.
And the size alone is larger than many states. I don't know how many people know that, but yeah, just the county itself is larger than many states, and the Inland Empire itself is larger, I think, than half the states in the country if you put in San Bernardino and Riverside County landmass combined.
Yeah, no, that's true. But the other thing that occurred to me is, having been experiencing a difficult time getting in on the path to being a city manager, I figured, okay, well, if I have this opportunity to serve as a county supervisor, maybe that will help me build some more credibility and relationships. And then on the back end of that, get my way into a city manager job. So, I thought, okay, well, maybe this is another path. In the meantime, not so bad being a county supervisor. Right? So I went through the application process. I was a finalist. The finalists were all interviewed at a public board of supervisors meeting that was televised. Politics being what it is, certain things were done behind the scenes, and that appointment ended up not happening for me, which is okay. They ended up with a lady named Dawn Rao, who ended up being a phenomenal supervisor. She's amazing, and as it turns out, I'm really happy with the way that went. Right.
It all worked out well for you.
It did. And it helped lead me to where I am today, because that was December of 2018. In January, the next month, I get a call from a guy. His name is Jeremy Smith. He has since become a good friend of mine, but we didn't know each other all that well at the time. And he had been watching the interviews. And, he said, "Hey, I watched your interview. You did great." And I said, "Well, first of all, you need better hobbies." And, I said, secondly, thank you. I appreciate the compliment. That makes me feel good. And he said, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I've been, before I got distracted here with this application process for the board seat, I had been applying for city manager jobs and assistant city manager jobs. I'd really like to be a city manager someday." And he said, "Well, funny you say that, because I and one other person were, as you know, elected to the city council in the city of Canyon Lake just in November. And we just decided not to renew the contract of our city manager. So we're about to do a recruitment." And he said, "Let's get together." So we got together and we talked, everything clicked. And he said, I really want you to apply." So I went through that process. There were, I believe, about 34 applicants. And the city of Canyon Lake is an interesting city. Not a whole lot of traditional economic development opportunity there. It's landlocked. It's small geographically. There's one, retail center there, which, in California, cities rely heavily on sales tax to fund their services, sales and property tax. But so the city was running a deficit of about $800,000 a year at that time, with about maybe $3 million or so in the bank. So it was scary times. When he hired me.
To give the audience a sense of scale, what's the general fund budget size, roughly speaking? Do you recall?
At that time, it was around just under $4 million.
That's a big deficit.
Yeah, no, it's a huge
deficit.
huge deficit, huge deficit. And what had happened, and one of the things that scares me still, Joe, is the cost of everything has just gotten so high, but public safety especially in California has just grown exponentially in recent years. And cities who contract for those services with their county, you're just kind of held hostage because the rate is what it is. There's no ability to negotiate it. The only thing you can negotiate is the service level in that contract. Yes, you can if you can't afford the price they give you, the only thing you can do is reduce the number of deputies on the street, right? Which nobody wants. And in Canyon Lake, their contract only included one deputy position, 24 hours, but only one. So there was nowhere to come back. And it was similar on the fire side, contracting with the county for fire service. There's one station with one engine in it in the city. And so there was not a whole lot of room to cut back there. And it's over 70% of your budget,
Yes.
Police and fire. And so it was a scary time. And so, they brought in a lot of the traditional applicants, people who had been career local government people. And then here I was, who had never been a city manager, never been an assistant city manager, never been a director within a city organization. And I came in.
But you've signed the front of checks before.
I had signed the front of checks. I've been running my business and managing development deals, and I had been on the elected side, so I understood things from the council's perspective, which has been helpful in my career. But I looked at their budget and I put together some thoughts, some programs that I thought could potentially fix the budget. If the council had the political will and the backbone to implement some projects, like starting its own fire department, breaking from the county, starting a fire department, like implementing an emergency medical services or EMS subscription program, renegotiating contracts like the trash hauling contract, and increasing the franchise fee that is paid to the city by the trash hauler. Some cities, their fees were double what Canyon Lake's franchise fee was. Some of these things would be unpopular publicly. I was aware of that because they would result in cost increases to residents, even though none of them were technically taxes. They would increase costs.
Spoken like the man who ran a pack of the Inland Empire taxpayers.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So I came into the interview and I said, well, you're in a tough spot. In fact, during the interview, when the council member said, if you get this job, you'll probably have it for about 3 years, and then you'll have to find another one because we're probably going to have to declare bankruptcy and disincorporate.
That's encouraging,
right? I said, man, this is the city for me. This is, but hey, look, it was exciting. Look, there is like, for someone who needed, who was hungry for making a name for himself, I knew that I could do the job. I knew it, but no one else did.
Yeah.
So I was willing to if they had said, we'll pay you $10, I would have probably taken it. Just to show that, look, I can do this.
Yeah.
Right.
And make that pivot that you've been trying to make.
Yeah. And so, I during the interview, I just laid it out. Here's how I think you can fix the problem. And I laid out those programs, and they just I saw them looking at each other. And I found it afterwards from one of the council members. The discussion afterwards was that's it. That's our guy. And they were willing to take a flyer on a guy who'd never been a city manager or an ACM or a director. And they did really like the private sector background. That's something that appealed to them. They knew that the traditional approach wasn't going to get it done. And so they wanted someone who was willing to take some risks and be bold. And so many in the profession, I believe, are overly risk averse.
Of course.
And and I think a lot of people who become city managers, by the time they become a city manager, they're further along in their career, and they're looking at I've got a few more years until I can start collecting that pension. And not everybody. There are definitely some forward-thinking, creative city, just amazing city managers out there. But it's also common to see the other side where people just seem to be so scared to rock the boat. Right.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to do a quick little sidebar here, Chris, because I've talked about this numerous times in different contexts. And my personal philosophy when I go to interview for a job is I want to stand out. I either want them to say there's no way in hell that guy's for us, or I want them to say that's the guy I really want to learn more about. I think if you try to play it safe and you play this milquetoast sort of vanilla style, I could try to be the decent city manager and fit in everywhere. I think that's a lost cause. I don't want anything. I don't want any part of that. And I think especially if you are an aspiring executive trying to land your first gig, there's nothing that benefits you by playing it safe and being conservative, because you're going into every recruitment outgunned because they have more experience than you. And I think you have to lay it out on the line. You have to go above and beyond. You got to put it out on the table like you did, right? Where you construct a plan and you say, hey, this is my thought process, and you got to go. I don't want to say it's a Hail Mary, because I don't think that's the proper way to frame it, but you got to throw some punches, right? Are you going in there to play a prevent defense or to not get knocked out, or are you going in there to knock someone out and land the gig, right? I think I just think that too many people are so afraid of not being picked that they really self-sabotage themselves by doing these milquetoast, vanilla style interviews. And I think you need to swing for the fences. And Chris, I know you talk about a lot of these issues on your podcast that you've recently launched. You've launched the Gov360 podcast. That was the culmination of the fruits that were born out of the podcast you created for the city of Yucaipa, your award-winning podcast there, the Yucaipa 360 podcast. Why don't you speak a little bit about some of those issues you've been talking about on Gov360?
Yeah, no. So podcasting was something I kind of got into accidentally when I was in the city of Yucaipa. It just started as a need to get information out, and we started doing videos. And before you knew it, we were doing a full blown podcast. And when I left the city of Yucaipa, I didn't know what my future was going to hold in the short term. I felt confident I would land somewhere good eventually, but I didn't know if that was going to be 2 months down the road or 12 months down the road. And I wanted to stay engaged and do something productive. And I missed I missed the podcast. I missed talking about the profession. The episodes we did with UCAPA 360 that were my favorite, that I got the most positive feedback on, were the episodes that were not city specific, but they're the episodes that really talked about how local government worked and about the city management profession. And I would then go to conferences and other city managers come up to me and say, "Oh man, I love UCAPA 360." And I would say, "Well, you live in Colorado. Why are you listening to UCAPA 360?" And they say, "Well, I saw it. It came to me. A friend said, check this out." And so, when I left UCAPA, I started Gov 360, and we talk about issues that I hope resonate with those who work in local government, from city managers all the way down through the organization. And we talk a lot about leading boldly, not being timid, not being afraid to do the things that the community needs, out of fear of what ramifications that might have in your own career. We talk a lot about what's going on with social media, with the spread of disinformation and misinformation. One of my favorite guests has been Sam Tolles, Civ is Social, and I've become a true believer in his approach, where we have to do a better job in local government of telling our stories. And I think as city managers, we have to do a better job of telling our personal stories, right, and our career stories,
Yes.
and the stories of
100%.
what we're doing in the community. But it's so important to me that, if you want to be a city manager, if you want to step into that chair, first of all, know why. It's amazing to me how many people can't tell you why when they come to you asking for advice on how to become a city manager. But do not take the job just to sit in the chair and collect a check and work to retirement, right? That is not the right place for you, because you will not be happy. Right.
No.
And
there's easier ways to make a living.
Yeah. And Joe, I really appreciate the work you're doing with AAME, because I think helping city managers craft better contracts and put better protections in those contracts is going to help city managers lead from a position of strength instead of one of fear, right? Because you cannot be effective leading from a place of fear, right? You're
always looking over your shoulder, wondering if your paycheck's going to be there. Yeah. That's yeah. Hey, Chris, I want to. You bring up a really interesting point. I think it's going to be a great topic of conversation here. That's a nice segue. You are a former communications expert, right? You were in that field of politics and what have you. I was a communications director for an elected official. I helped get the narrative out, communicate the messaging. Obviously, I have my own brand. I hate to even say that, but it's true, I guess, with my platform, with the podcast and LinkedIn and what have you. And, something that I find very frustrating, and I think it's something that we need to work, and I think you're the proper guest to have on the show to talk about it, but I think it's something we need to work on for our collective colleagues, our peers, is the failure on the part of so many city managers, the majority, to take a proactive, engaged role with the development or creation of their own narrative or story. Like, I'm so glad you brought up Sam Tolles a minute ago, because Sam basically talks about how it's important to tell your story as a city, right, through social media. Right. If you don't tell your story, other people are going to tell your story. And so often we have city managers who fail to step up and tell their story in a proactive way, and therefore they're allowing other individuals, other stakeholder groups, other newspaper publications or media outlets, they're telling the story about you as a city manager, and they're telling the story about your performance and the results or lack thereof. Yeah. And what are your thoughts on that, as far as the sort of the risk of, and I think this goes back to what you said a second ago too, the risk averse nature, right? A lot of city managers don't really want to be out in the limelight or out in the public domain because there's a perceived risk there.
Yeah, it is so important to define yourself before someone else defines you, right? I learned this lesson the hard way. I think, Joe, when I became a city manager, it was such a realization of a long-held dream, right? And it was difficult for me at first to shake that political stigma, that image people had of me as the political guy and the consultant guy, right?
Right.
And so I just threw myself in 100%. I turned my back on everything that I was, right? I
overcompensated.
Yeah, I did. And some things I think were good, and some things were probably overcompensation. So for example, I when I first became a city manager, I re-registered, right? No party preference, right? Because I felt that it was it's the job of a city manager to represent the city council, no matter what their political ideologies are, to implement policy even-handedly. To the provision of municipal services should not be influenced by ideology. There's no Republican or Democrat way to fill a pothole, right? And I just wanted the public to have some confidence that I wasn't coming at this from an ideological perspective. I didn't have an axe to grind. I didn't have an agenda other than, doing my best to serve the city council and the community. Right.
Right.
And so
I want to step on you there for a second too, because I've kind of felt the same way. There's been a lot of times where it was contextually appropriate for me to bring up certain issues or maybe discuss them. When I'm on LinkedIn and I'm, in my height, my peak, I was doing 2 posts a day, 7 days a week on LinkedIn, probably for 2 years, right? Yeah. And there were a lot of opportunities I could have inserted some sort of ideological jab or political commentary that was attached to my former life, right, or my what have you, and that would have been contextually fair game, right? It's not even me wielding a partisan axe or anything like that, right. But I consciously and deliberately shied away from a lot of that because I wanted to go the extra mile and show, hey, this is nonpartisan. We're not going to go down that road. I just want to focus on helping city managers and talking about local government and just be as neutral as possible. So that was like where I tried to overcompensate to a degree. Now on the podcast, I freely admit at times, and more so here, like in this conversation with you, because it's contextually appropriate. But I also try to be transparent and intellectually honest and say, hey, I do have some biases or I do have some political leanings, and it's only fair for me to share that because I don't want you to feel like I'm blowing smoke or misleading you, the audience, and pretending that I don't have a partisan background. I do. Right, and it'd be intellectually just honest for me to suggest I didn't. So. Well,
look, we don't stop being human beings just because we become a city manager, right? I mean, we're entitled to have opinions, right? I think the difference is that those opinions will not stop me from executing policy directives of the city council, whether I agree with those decisions or not, as long as they're legal, right?
Yes, as long as you're not subverting your policymakers because you have your own political, beliefs, then you're in good shape, right?
Right. I tell my council members, look, I will give you advice. I'll tell you what I think. I'll always be honest with you about my, what I feel is the right thing to do. But once the council votes and that decision's made, even if I believe with my entire being it's the wrong thing to do, then I will execute that as if it was my own idea. Right? That's the
marching orders.
Yep. Again, as long as it's legal.
Yes, right. Absolutely.
Yeah. But so I had pushed back. I pushed my former self so far back that I think it left me in a vulnerable position. I think what I was trying to do, Joe, I was trying to mold myself into the image of what I saw in other city managers, right? Instead of leaning into what makes me unique as a city manager. And that hurt me. When I went to the city of Yucaipa, I came in at a very tumultuous time in the city's history. The politics in that city were and continue to be very volatile, right? And there was a group, a very active group there that was essentially an anti-growth, anti-development group. And because there was a new majority on the council that brought me in, and that majority was very pro-growth, their assumption was that they were bringing in this guy to basically, they were bringing in their guy who was going to just pave over the city. And then they started looking into my background and they said, oh my gosh, look, this guy used to do consulting work for developers. He's part of this whole cabal, that just wants to develop the whole city, doesn't care about the more rural history of the city, wants to get rid of that. And none of that was true, right? Like, I execute the policy.
You lived there for a reason, right? You lived there for a reason, Chris, right? Yucaipa is a pretty special place.
It's beautiful.
For those who don't,
Yeah. And so, no, look, I think it misunderstood the role of city manager. My job is not to execute my own policy. It's to execute the policy directives of the city council and uphold the general plan, which lays out, by the way, where everything's going to be built and developed. So, but I think I had let my guard down. I allowed that group for months to define me, and I stayed fairly silent. And I never recovered.
Which you never would have done that in your old life.
Absolutely not. I would have never done that. Yeah. I would have gone on the offensive from the beginning. I would have been communicating on the front end. But these experiences make us stronger, right? I will no longer make the mistake of trying to be some image of what a city manager should be instead of leaning into who I am as a city manager.
So, Chris, with your decades of experience, both in politics, the political arena, as well as in communications and public affairs, what is your advice to those city managers who are reticent to really engage in any meaningful way when it comes to shaping their own narrative, right? Because you have a lot of these individuals, and I think a lot more old school city managers who sort of just put their head in the sand and act like there's nothing going on around them, even though there's this whole whirlwind of things that are going out there, especially nowadays with the social media cesspool that we have to deal with, right, in local government. What is your advice to how, first of all, why they should be more aggressive in doing it, right? We've kind of unpacked a little bit, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on more on why they should be more aggressive in creating that narrative. And secondarily, what should they be doing to help shape that narrative?
Well, I think the first thing, Joe, is don't be afraid to brand yourself personally, right? Don't feel that just because you're a city manager, you need to be hiding in the shadows. Right. Now, you need to be careful and not upstage your city council. It's not about you, right? You serve the city council. But don't look, it's not about ego. Putting yourself out there and being public about who you are, branding yourself isn't about ego, it's about resilience. It's about career longevity, right?
Thank you.
And I have to, as a city manager, think about the community I'm serving. But we all know that the next election cycle, it could be a different city council, and that city council could have different ideas, and you could be looking for the next job. And what brand have you built for yourself? When people Google you, what comes up when they run into people in your former community and they ask about you, what those people are going to say? What impression has been given to them about you, right? That's very important. Look, I believe as a city manager, we should all be developing websites, professional websites for ourselves, right? Anymore, it's easy to do. AI helps. I use a site called Wix. You can go on there and use their templates, and within a couple hours, you've got a professional-looking website. Mine is chrisman.us. Feel free to take a look. I don't think everyone has to go as far as to have a podcast.
We don't recommend that.
It's a lot of work, and
I do recommend proactively reaching out to podcast hosts such as Joe Turner at City Manager Unfiltered or Chris Mann at Go360, because it's pretty amazing what those SEO, search engine optimization results are when someone's doing a Google search and then they do a search for your name and city manager of the city and they see that podcast interview. It's going to be pretty high, usually on the first page of those Google results, right?
Yeah, and that's important because, look, if you are in a community where there are contentious things going on and there are people blogging about you or saying things on social media about you or writing letters to the editor in the local newspaper about you, those things will appear when people do searches, right? And so 100%. If that's the only thing people see, you're not in a good place, when you're looking for that next job and, your potential employers, those council members are looking up information on you. So look, I think it's good to have a website. I think it's good to be active on social media. I think it's good to put out articles occasionally. There are publications that will do stories about you. Public CEO is one that comes to mind. Find out what it is that makes you unique as a city manager, or focus on topics that are kind of your specialty, programs you've implemented that have been successful, your areas of expertise, and start pumping out content, right? Because then you're going to start to be known for those things. When people search your name, those things are going to pop up, and it's not only going to be the negative things that the keyboard warriors are putting out.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to go back to this thing that you said a moment ago, because I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think there's a major issue with this idea of ego and this idea that if you're talking about yourself, if you're somehow quote unquote bragging about yourself, then you're somehow got a big ego, and that's a negative. And I tell you, man, our peers got to look past that. When you go to apply for a job and you have your resume, are you selling yourself short and not putting all your best accomplishments on there because you don't want to brag about yourself? Nowadays, with the way the landscape's changed, the days of just sort of applying for a job with a traditional cover letter and resume, those are over.
Yeah.
Those are over. Yeah. Hey, Chris, you weren't guaranteed to get that job in Canyon Lake because of how you performed and interviewed during that that appointment process to the vacant county supervisor seat in San Bernardino County. But your performance in that interview sure as hell played a big role in you getting that opportunity. And that was not a traditional resume cover letter type situation. City managers need to fully understand that they are in a battle, a competitive battle for these jobs, and you have to differentiate yourself from these other individuals that you're going to be competing against. And the way you could differentiate yourself, obviously, traditionally has been the cover letter, resume, et cetera, and then the interview process. But the reality is, and I don't think I'm being disingenuous when I say this, a lot of these city manager recruitments, a lot of the decisions made oftentimes before the finalists are even selected, because they are going through and looking at these candidates. They're looking at their Google footprint. They're looking at their past public persona, and they're identifying or not identifying with candidates based off what they're seeing. Right. And if you are a candidate who's like, oh, I'm going to bury my head in the sand and I'm not going to say anything or develop my own brand or label or whatever you want to call it, then all they're going to see is the critics who've attacked you. That's all they're going to see.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so, you really need to go out and put your best foot forward and communicate something and communicate what you are about. And Chris, a moment ago, I think you hit something again that I think is really spot on. We are generalists generally by definition. City managers are generalists. Mm-hmm. You and I are definitely generalists because we came in from an atypical path, and we don't really have we didn't really have major local government administrative experience when we took the roles that we took.
Right.
But I will say this: there is nothing wrong with you as a city manager developing or cultivating a persona or a specialty of whatever that might be. For example, if you are going into an organizations and turning around organizations, you become sort of a turnaround artist, right? That could be great. If you are known for your budget finance acumen and you are going into organizations that have budget deficits and you are getting rid of those deficits and putting them back on the road to a surplus. If you are going into organizations and maybe you're known for major capital improvement projects, right? Maybe you are it's not a traditional route, but the PIO route. If you are really good with communications and you're going into it, you're applying for a job with an organization where they have a lot of black marks on the books because they've been getting skewered in the press or whatnot, and they need someone who help cultivate that image with the stakeholders and get the narrative out in that regard, then you're going to be more competitive than other candidates who have maybe a specialized skill set. And this goes back to what I said earlier in this interview, Chris. You as a city manager candidate, you don't have to be all things to every job. Like the idea that you should be competitive for every single position that's floated out there is nonsensical, and it's a fool's errand. So there's no harm in picking a persona or cultivating a persona or a niche that you're specialized in or that you're known for, because when the community that does have that need comes around and they're looking for a city manager and you apply, you're going to go to the top of the heap and be super competitive.
Yeah, no, you've said a lot of right on things there, Joe. And I think, look, when I went into the city of Yucaipa, I inherited another deficit. I'm kind of developed a niche for that, even though it was not my intention. I came into a $7 million a year deficit in the city of Yucaipa. And in order to correct that deficit, first we had to help the community understand why the deficit existed, how we got there, because the narrative in that community had been very different. They had always been told, for forever, that the budget was healthy, one of the best run cities, et cetera. Turns out that was a little bit of smoke and mirrors. The city was headed towards bankruptcy, right? And so we had to get a sales tax measure done. We ended up putting a 1% measure on the ballot. We had to renegotiate contracts. There were a number of programs we had to put in place there to correct that situation. And within a 2-year period, we implemented programs and passed a tax that generated about $8 million of revenue. And it would not have happened had the communication not been spot on. And that whole process reminded me how important it is to be communicating effectively, and effective communication today is so different than it was even 10 years ago. It's not. So when I think about branding as a city manager, It's not enough just to put together a good resume, or have a Facebook page, professional social media page where occasionally you post some static thing, right? People today are receiving and digesting information from different sources, depending on age, typically, right? So we know the older generations are on Facebook, younger generations are on Instagram, the even younger generations are on TikTok, and video is where it's at, right? Video is king. So I think it's very important that we adjust. I think government has been slow to adjust to those realities, but as a city manager, trying to establish a professional brand to help people understand who you are, what makes you unique as a manager. I think it's equally as important to keep those things in mind, that it's not going to be enough just to put together a resume, and have a Facebook page or a LinkedIn page where you list your experience, right? That's nice. You should have those things. But you really have to. But those
are table stakes.
Yes. Yeah.
That's expected, and it's really foolish and naive to think that, we as executives leading municipal corporations all the time will say, hey, we need to work on communications and communicating to our stakeholders and our citizens from the city's perspective, right? Like, we'll say, hey, we need to make sure we're communicating to our residents as a city, right? Well, don't you think that you as a city manager also need to be communicating to your future stakeholders what you're about and what your narrative is? Like, it's sort of common sense for people like you and me, because we were operating in that world. And I think too often some of our peers have just sort of been a little slow on the pivot, the transition, how things have changed in the last decade or 20 years, especially when it comes to communication and branding and positioning yourself for future jobs and what have you.
Yeah, Joe. One of the things that I really took away from the Caipa experience is that, and from Canyon Lake, no matter what issues you're dealing with in your city, there are other cities who are grappling or will be grappling with those same issues. All right, so it's grab onto whatever it is, whatever problem it is that you've been working on, that you have solved, that because of your work in that area, better than most, right? And put yourself out there with that, right?
Should tell your story. Tell that story, right?
To tell your story, because that's going to catch someone's attention who is grappling with that same issue, right?
100%.
To your point, you don't have to be the expert in every topic, but if you're the guy who just saw or girl that just solved the problem that some other city is grappling with, and that city council is looking for a city manager, and they look you up, and man, look, he found the solution to that problem. We ought to seriously consider hiring that guy, right?
Yeah,
that's powerful.
And we're getting a little long in the tooth on this episode, but I want to finish up with this point, Chris. I've talked about this again in my book, The City Manager's Guide to Contract Negotiations, and I've talked about this elsewhere on my platforms, is if you are a nameless, faceless, anonymous sort of blob of a city manager where no one knows you exist, why in the hell do you think anybody's going to go to bat for you or stick up for you when things get tough and maybe the council's looking at parting ways with you, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you want to hang on to your job as long as possible. I mean, obviously with some exceptions here if there's a super toxic environment, but how would you ever expect anybody to come to your defense or be invested in you if they don't know who you are or know you exist? I mean, it's like there's been some look at all the celebrities or personalities that we hear about when they pass away, right? Mm-hmm. We hear about them because there's some sort of connection that we have to these celebrities, right? Whether it's a musician or an athlete or even somebody like Charlie Kirk, who was, recently assassinated. People die every day. Thousands of people die every day, and nobody knows who they are, and no one cares because they don't know who they are. So if you want people to be invested in you and you want to have an ability to hang on to your position, right, which, let's be honest, I mean, we don't want to lose our jobs when we're trying to put food on the table. Well, you have to be out there and invested in the community. You have to let the people know who you are. They gotta know who they're fighting for or why they want to fight for you. If they don't know what you're doing, if they don't know who you are and they don't know what the hell you've been doing, why are they ever going to show up to a council meeting and support you or defend you when your governing body might be trying to run you out of town?
That's right. It's a great
Yeah.
point. It's a great point. Yeah. And,
Hey,
it is a little bit of a balancing. I just want to look, you can take it too far too, right? I mean, a lot of the communication I do is really targeted towards the city management profession and others within the profession, but I'm also building a body of work that lives online. Right. And so, I am not within the community that I'm working as a city manager, putting myself out there a lot in front of my city council. I think that there is a distinction there that's worth
100%.
Yeah.
And I think also that's where obviously every city manager has to be astute and in tune with their governing body, because if you have some super political animals on your governing body and they may not want the city manager out running in front and discussing all these issues and being the focal point. Some other communities, a lot of small towns, they might be very happy to have the city manager running point and doing that stuff. It just all depends on your area, right?
Very
and
true.
also,
Very true.
And also, Chris, here's the other thing too, right? Sometimes you have to also be thinking about, just because your council here today is okay with something doesn't mean that the council that you apply for a job in the future is going to be super excited about how you carried yourself in that other organization, even if you had the full blessing. So there's a lot of nuances, right? And there's always going to be risk. And, there was risk when I started doing my LinkedIn posting, for sure. There was amazing amounts of risk. There's a lot of risk when I started the podcast. There's no question that me doing LinkedIn and starting the podcast will eliminate me from a lot of job opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also fair to say that I think it will make me super competitive in some job opportunities if I decide to apply for them. So,
it's all about the right fit. It's all about the right fit. Yeah. And so, yes.
That's why I say it over and over, Chris. I say this over and over. When you are applying for a job, I think, and I've talked about this multiple times, too many city managers go through the process of a job recruitment and they get so far into it because they run so long, they get so emotionally invested that as soon as they get the offer, they're like, okay, I want the job. Well, are you sure? Have you fully vetted this organization and these people to make sure you really want to be there and that's the right stock for you? Because just because they want you, and it feels good to be wanted, don't get it twisted. It always feels good to be wanted. But just because they say they want you right now doesn't mean that you should want them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's very true. And it's hard to be picky when you're trying to get your foot in the door for the first time, or, if you're in transition, right? And you're looking for the next thing. And that's why, I always counsel people, before you step into that chair, make sure that you are financially ready for the job, because you have to be able to walk away and know that, your mortgage is going to be taken care of, right? And, your family is going to be taken care of. That's so important. And you want to be able to be picky. And to make sure it's the right fit before you say yes.
Absolutely. And, Chris, I wanted to tackle another issue that we can get to today. Maybe we can do it on another episode at some point in the future. But I would like to talk about some of the political dynamics at the local level, how that's changed. I do have some thoughts on this idea that a lot of our colleagues and peers think that they are in tune with the quote unquote politics of local government. But I think the political landscape's changed so immensely in the last 10, 15 years, that I think there's a lot of blind spots, especially when it comes to the partisan political dynamics at play. And I think there's a lot of city managers who are caught in this old world of local government politics and have not really got up to speed on the partisan dynamics. And maybe we can flesh that out in a future conversation.
Yeah, that could easily be a whole episode right there. A lot to dive in there. I think in local government, it's been hammered into us so much to stay out of the politics. We're not supposed to be political. Stay out of the political fray. I think to the point that a lot of public employees have become tone deaf to the politics, and there's tremendous value in learning the politics, understanding the politics, being politically savvy, without being overtly political and acting politically in the job. But I'd love to unpack that with you. Yeah,
I think there's a religious saying or something about you can be in the world but not of the world, right? I think there's an element of a lot of our brothers and sisters in the profession who don't realize that they're in the world and they just don't want to be of the world, but you're in it no matter what. So you gotta maybe be a little more in tune to some of those dynamics. And maybe we can unpack that in a future episode.
That'd be great. I'd love to.
Awesome. Chris Mann, he is the city manager for Wildomar, California. He's also the host of the Gov360 podcast. I will put a link to his podcast in the show notes, as well as a link to his personal website, which I would encourage a lot of you folks to tackle and get your own domain and get a website up. I will be honest and be fully accountable. I do not have my own website, but I think I have a good excuse. I think I have a pretty good footprint out there when it comes to the podcast and LinkedIn. So
yes, I'd say so.
I don't think it's quite as necessary for me, although I do have my domain. I just never built out the site. But I'll put links to your website on there. It's really well done, Chris, and links to the podcast. And thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Joe. It was a pleasure, and look forward to talking to you soon.
I appreciate it. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered Podcast, a podcast for city managers and public sector executives. If you like the content, you like the show, please make sure you hit that follow, subscribe button. Please make sure you leave a rating and review on your platform of choice, especially those Spotify and Apple users. Catch you next week.